Awesome. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Solar Advocacy from Your Couch, or lobbying from your couch, and ways you can make a difference. Here's a quick run through of our agenda. We're going to start with introductions. I'll talk a little bit about our theory of change. We're going to talk a lot about lobbying, how we could do that virtually, and then spend a little bit of time talking about writing an LTE, social media, and some national campaigns that you can plug into. So a quick check-in around logistics. We are excited to take your questions, and I have been impressed in our past webinars at all of the great questions from our members. So look forward to your questions. You're welcome to use the chat throughout the webinar to add questions. We'll try to answer them as we can, but we'll definitely come back to them at the end. And folks from my team will be working on answering questions in the chat as they can. And if you want to make sure your chat goes to everyone, you can make sure and select that little drop down and make sure it goes to all panelists and attendees. Or you can just send to all panelists if you want. But yeah, and you can reach out through the chat for technical difficulties to the panelists, and Annie and Lisa will help you out. And afterwards, we'll share the recording and materials and links that come up throughout the webinar. So yeah, I guess I'll introduce myself quickly. I'm Liz Veazey, and I'm a solar advocacy campaigner here at Solar United Neighbors. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, but work on policy across Sun states and nationally. And I'm basically half of our policy team, which is led by Glenn Brand, who's our VP of Policy and Advocacy. And he, I think, may or may not be joining us right now, but I think he will be joining us to help answer questions in the chat at some point, which is exciting. He has a lot of expertise and has been doing this work for a long time. And we've also got Lisa and Annie. Lisa, I'll pass it over to you if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here. My name's Lisa. I'm an engagement specialist with Sun, so I work with a number of different states to make sure that we're pushing forward our campaigns, upholding solar legislation, and then also building out our co-ops and working with you all. It's my second week on the job, so I'm excited to be here. And it's really neat to see folks from all over. It looks like Arizona and otherwise, so excited to learn with you all.
Awesome. And I'm Annie Wolf. I'm the Director of Engagement. So I work with Lisa and our other engagement specialist, Alexis, who you may have seen emails from in the past. So I cover our engagement programming nationally, including volunteer programs and how we work with advocacy. So, and I've been here just since February, so not too long, but excited to be here today.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to kick us off briefly talking about Solar United Neighbors theory of change. And we really believe in this circular theory, and we keep doing these things over and over through our solar co-ops, which help people go solar in an easier, lower cost way by coming together. We also bring people together around solar congresses, Sun Scout programs, happy hours, webinars, National Solar Tour. And then we mobilize you all to fight for our energy rights. So this could be around state legislation, regulations, or working with state regulators, or more. And so we keep going through and building, and we're excited that you all are here to do that with us. And in terms of our energy rights or solar rights, I think, that's not necessarily the end all be all, but how we sort of articulate it as a sort of nonpartisan, that they are nonpartisan and that everyone should have access to solar, whether or not their roof, they have a roof that can take solar panels. And yeah, we want to make sure there's a competitive market, and that net metering is a really important piece of that, and people are fairly compensated. So those are a few pieces of the energy rights and how we would articulate them. And over again, you know, going through this cycle, we found that you all as solar homeowners, solar businesses, supporters of solar are really compelling advocates for clean energy, and have a really important role to play in helping us get good policies. And so we are excited to work with you all and sort of lift up your voices and make sure that they are part of the conversation and that they help make sure that we get, you know, pro-solar policies. And that's an important part of our mission, is elevating solar homeowners' perspective to lobby for these policies. So what is lobbying? I think very simply, we would say it's getting what you want by advocating to the people with power to give it to you. And does it work? Yes, it does work. I mean, it doesn't, not every single, you don't always get what you want every single time, but I think it always makes an impact. And sometimes you do get it. You know, typically the use of the word lobbying has a lot of negative connotations with corporations and lawyers and big money lobbying on behalf of special interests. But the kind of lobbying that we're talking about is grassroots lobbying on behalf of policies and laws to protect our energy rights and to ensure justice and promote the common good. And I think we hear, you know, most lawmakers genuinely want to hear from their constituents and learn about issues and why they're important to their constituency. And they, of course, want to get reelected, which is important to connect with their constituency. But a lot of people just don't lobby their elected officials, and even fewer do it effectively. So, and big money is really good at it. So it's really important for us to step up and try to get better at this and do more of it. Let's keep going. So I've created this as sort of, you know, going from easy and short, simple actions at the bottom, like signing a petition or sending a template email, to actions that take more time and are more personal and have a bigger impact, like a personal email or letter, a personal phone call, attending a lobbying event, or an in-person meeting. And then here's a graphic that sort of shows the results from a survey of congressional staff conducted by the Congressional Management Foundation, showing that representatives say that in-person visits from constituents, 94% say that that influences them. I'm not sure what's going on with the 6%, but 92% of them are influenced by individual emails, 88% by individual letters, 87% by letters to the editor or editorials. So representatives say that these things really do make an impact. So just wanted to. And then I sort of edited that pyramid that we started with to think about what does that look like specifically in a sort of online remote lobbying world. And, you know, it's pretty similar, but sort of going from the easy things to, you know, a little bit harder, takes more time. And then, you know, a virtual meeting with your representative would really be the sort of have the biggest impact. And then sort of stepping back, I guess, a little to talk about how does a bill become a law. So, and this is really sort of focused on generally the flow for a state law. So usually there's a bill, maybe there's a draft bill, and then it gets refined. It goes to, it's assigned to a committee, and then and it may be important to track like who are the members of the committee that the bill you're interested in will likely go to. for what committee is it at, and who's in charge of that committee, who's on the committee. So then the committee, if the committee decides to move forward with the bill, they would probably hold a public hearing and then vote. And then if they decided to move the bill forward, it would then move on. But sometimes things can get held up by a committee chair, maybe doesn't support a bill and won't allow it to come up for a vote. So that's something to be aware of. Then it moves on to the House and the Senate at the state level. And usually they would both have to vote to approve it. They could have some sort of conference committee or come together. If they pass different versions, they might pass the same version and then it would just go on to the governor. The governor could sign it or veto it. And then if it gets vetoed, usually the legislators can override that veto if enough of them vote to do that. And then if that happens, then it becomes enacted and becomes the law. Usually it includes a date in the bill based on when it will actually be enacted. So lobbying steps to get in there and influence that process of how a bill becomes law. Usually starts with research and preparation and thinking about organizing others to join. You're more likely to get a meeting if you have more people, and we're going to dig into these steps in a sec. Then scheduling a meeting, which usually you want to do a week or more in advance, and then having the meeting, and then sort of follow up after the meeting. And a lot of this is the same whether you're meeting in person or virtually. So digging into step one around research and preparation, it's important to sort of understand where is your representative around solar and energy, what's their background, what's their record. We can help you find that information if you're interested in that. And then as this little graphic sort of shows, what representatives want to know, again, based on, I think maybe the same survey of congressional staff. From the other graphic, representatives really want to know why you care, what do you want, what are you asking them for, and personal stories related to the issue. So those are really that's really what you want to try to focus on in your comments. And you're also going to want to make sure to introduce yourself. But we've really found that those personal stories have a big impact, and generally have a greater impact than just sort of presenting facts about the bill, though, you may want to weave those in. But the more you can focus on that personal story and how a bill solves a problem or impacts your family or community or business, can make a big difference. And then you'll want to make sure you're including your asking for their vote and including the bill number. Maybe you're asking for them to co-sponsor if they're supportive. So thinking about that in terms of preparation, and then also thinking about, in advance of the meeting, organizing other people to join. So you could reach out to friends and neighbors, community members and leaders. You could work with us at Solar United Neighbors to help engage other folks who might be in the same legislative district. And we're happy to help with that. You can partner with other organizations if that makes sense. And then, as I mentioned before, having this group will be more likely that you'll be able to get a meeting than if you're just one person. Scheduling the meeting. As I mentioned before, probably thinking like 1 week or more in advance to make sure you can get on their calendar. You want to try to meet with the legislator or your representative, but if they're not available, often they will set up meetings with their staff or a legislative aide, which is also good, and they should be passing along the information to the legislature or the legislator. Step 4, attending the meeting, making sure that at the meeting you're telling your story and you're allowing for opportunities for the legislators to speak about where they're coming from, about their concerns. If you don't know the answer to a question, just let them know that, but that you're willing to help, you're willing to come back and provide the answer later. And we are willing to help with that. And then make sure to close the meeting by thanking them and making sure that noting that you'll send a follow-up with any answers to their questions. And sort of meeting continued. If the representative opposes, you'll want to probably express some sort of disappointment, but make sure that you get information or questions from them about why they have that position, so that if possible, you could follow up and respond to some of their questions or concerns. And we are interested in helping folks with that if we can. And then if the representative is on your side and supports, make sure to thank them and make sure to have a clear ask, right? If they support, ask them to, do you want to ask them to co-sponsor the bill and or to recruit colleagues to support the bill? What can you ask them to do to really make sure that the bill moves forward? Whoops. All right, after the meeting, sort of review your notes, make sure you send that follow-up and thank them and include any of that information that they needed. And then you'll want to repeat your thanking them for their support, or either asking them, repeating your ask if they didn't make a commitment there. And then, so sort of key takeaways from that process: doing your research and preparing are really important. Telling your personal story is really important and really impactful, and that's what representatives say makes a big difference. Have a really strong ask, whether it's supporting the bill, co-sponsoring, whatever makes sense, and then make sure that you follow up from that meeting, answer questions, thank them, and etc. And then in sort of on a related note, just wanted to include a slide about testifying to a committee, which overall is very similar to what we just sort of talked through in terms of researching and preparing. You'll want to know what time limit you have, if there is one, for your comments, usually 2 or 3 minutes. Again, make sure to tell your personal story. Probably want to practice. It's often helpful if you can and you are able to prepare testimony in advance to email the clerk of the committee, so you can make sure to get your written testimony to the members in advance. And again, just like organizing others to attend the meeting, which helps you get a meeting generally. Having more people on your side attend and show support, or potentially all wear the same color shirt and have other people testify, can really show solidarity and support, and that can be powerful at an in-person hearing or potentially at a virtual committee testimony. So I just wanted to touch on this briefly, and I think we at Solar United Neighbors, we have some resources, more in-depth resources, and I think we'll probably be circling back later this summer with additional resources on LTEs, but we're always happy to help you draft one if you want that, and I'll provide an email to reach out to our advocacy team at the end, but it's basically just advocacy@solarunitedneighbors.org. But a couple quick tips: you want to check the word count for your paper. You'll want to identify the bill, explain why it's important, and sort of tell that story if you can. It's really hard to do that in 150 words, and I realize that, but if you can try to, say something about why it's important to you and why you care. And then you know, representatives pay attention to the local newspapers and, you know, track when their name is mentioned. So it's really important to make sure you mention their name and ask them, you know, to support your position. And then often the newspapers are more interested in letters if they're connected to something like an article that the paper published. So if you can do that, that can be helpful. Also, again, if you can organize other people to submit letters on the same topic, making a similar ask, that can generally help make sure one of those letters gets printed. But we'll make sure that you all get access to some of the additional resources we have on this, and you can just reach out and ask us if you want support on that or have questions. And then talk a little bit about social media pressured representatives and show a couple examples from some of the work that we've done, but also interested when we open up for questions in a minute to see if folks want to share other examples. But so thinking about that same sort of pyramid structure and things that are sort of easier and less impact generally towards the bottom, and things that are more impact towards the top. So, you know, sharing or making a personal post about a campaign and then tagging a representative, and then being a part of a larger tweet storm or Facebook storm that sort of brings a bunch of people all focused at the same representative or multiple or their representatives and sort of pushing the same thing can have more impact. So just a couple things we'll dig into more in a minute. Hashtags. Save Solar is one that we've used recently for our campaign to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And we really appreciate everyone who took action in that. And as many of you know, we won. So we should all celebrate that we won there. And FERC dismissed the petition that was trying to get the commission to set a ruling at the federal level around net metering that would have undone all of the state net metering policies. So we're really excited that that happened, and we'll continue to track that. But we use Save Solar in that campaign, and so that's an example of a hashtag. Tagging your reps. So I gave an example for the Iowa governor tweeting at someone. So if you start your tweet with a .at and then representative's name. So there's an example, Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon. It's generally really easy to find your representatives. I think almost all local, state, federal representatives in my experience are on Twitter, and they're generally relatively easy to find. And then, yeah, we'll talk a little bit about a day of action or a tweet storm where you're getting a bunch of people to all use the same hashtag on the same day, and we found that to be really effective. Here's a couple examples of us using hashtags in a campaign in West Virginia. The hashtag PPAs for WV, where we're trying to increase access to solar through getting the state of West Virginia to allow power purchase agreements for solar, which in a number of states has really helped catalyze schools going solar, municipal buildings, and more. So that's an example, and you can see there we're also tagging some of the representatives in West Virginia and asking people to call their representatives to make sure that legislation moves forward. There's a tweet on the right from using the Save Solar hashtag that we used on our National Day of Action. I think we had thousands and thousands of people retweeting and using that hashtag and asking people to take action. And that was really effective. I think we, through partners and our members and our partner organizations members, I think we were able to get 8,000 additional people or more to take action on that day, which was really great and really helped us get more than 20,000 comments overall. And there were more than 50,000 from people opposing the petition at FERC. So here's a couple more examples of tagging representatives. This is just from this week, from a campaign in Ohio. Many of you may have heard about the pretty egregious corruption scandal there. The FBI is investigating and has, arrested the Speaker of their House, and for $60 million racketeering bribery scandal related to passing this more than $1 billion bailout of basically dirty energy for First Energy Corp. And Solar United Neighbors was involved in fighting that bill last year. Sadly, it passed. Now we're learning more about why it passed and why representatives were supportive of it, even though their constituents overall were not supportive of it. But we're pushing hard now to fully repeal that legislation. So here's a couple of tweets that are using that repeal HB6 hashtag. Some of them are tagging the governor and the lieutenant governor in Ohio. And that's a big push with a whole coalition in Ohio to make sure that that gets repealed there. So here are a few campaigns, and I think I can put some links in the chat, or maybe Annie or Lisa can help me with links in the chat to some of these. These are all on our National Take Action page, but we've been doing work around getting more support for solar in the stimulus bill. And so the House of Representatives at the federal level passed the HEROES Act in late June, I think. And so that is good and has a lot of things that we would like to see. And so we're pushing for the Senate to include those in their stimulus, that it's under consideration right now. And we think that they'll probably take action the next week or two. So now is a good time to continue pushing around that. And so one easy thing, I guess, technically at the bottom of the pyramid is just to sort of take action through that form around the solar stimulus. We also have a utility shutoff moratorium campaign to get the Senate to make sure to pass a moratorium on utility shutoffs so that people are not being shut off from electricity or water during this pandemic. And we think that it's important for everyone to continue to have access to water and electricity and broadband. Those are all included there. And then we have another sort of, and the shutoff moratorium we're hoping will also pass either as a separate bill or part of this next stimulus in the next couple of weeks. So that's another push for senators at the federal level to support. And then we're also interested in supporting people to try to set up a virtual lobby meeting with your senators or their staff around these issues. So I guess let us know if you're interested in that. And then we have a sort of ongoing action if people are interested in asking your House member to join a solar caucus. Yeah, and thanks Annie for all those links in the chat so folks can see more information about those asks. And then if you want, there are also often ongoing state campaigns, and you can learn more about those. So solarunitedneighbors.org/ and then spell out your state. You should be able to find it. So there's Virginia, for example. And then you can also become a Sun member, which maybe many of you are already, which is free. And then you can access our state listservs and Facebook pages, which are a good way to stay in the loop around state legislation and actions related to those. Oh, and Annie's also helping people with a link in the chat to get to your state advocacy take action pages. And then I was going to mention, I think lastly, one other tool that we have that sort of helps get other people involved, because I think you can see that that's sort of a theme of like being more impactful and getting more folks involved. So we have a tool called Outreach Circle that we're sort of piloting, testing out, but you can get action alerts when things to take action, and it makes it really easy to share those actions with friends. So that's one way, one easy way to help spread the word and get more folks involved. You know, some other sort of ideas around being virtual and thinking about engaging other folks. You could host a virtual letter writing party. So you could write, you know, talk about what's happening and some talking points, and then have people write personal letters or emails to their representatives, and or you could think about letters to the editor and have a party. And so that could be a sort of fun way to help increase your impact by getting other folks to contact their reps and or write letters to the editor together. You could also think about hosting a calling or texting party to reach out to others and ask them to take action. So just some ideas for thinking about virtually connecting and engaging other folks. Here is more about Outreach Circle in particular. And yeah, there's a QR code that you can scan to get the link to join, and or one of us will eventually post it in the chat. And then it's a good way to sort of stay in the loop around actions that are going on and getting other folks involved. We also can make it really easy to share things on social media. And let's see. Yeah, I think I am finally at the end and hopefully left a good amount of time for questions. But yeah, as I've said before, we're happy to help folks connect with your representatives or do research around your representatives and their positions, or answer their questions if you're meeting with them. We have a lot of information on the website, and you can always reach out to our advocacy team at advocacy@solarunitedneighbors.org. So I think it looks like there was a lot of chats going on, though I was not able to track all of them. Annie, do you want to?
We have a few questions. First, Jose asked, how much do we know about NEM 3.0 in California? So I don't know if that's something we can follow up later on, or if you've got a cursory knowledge of what's going on there.
That is a great question, but I don't know the answer. But I guess I could say that NEM, or net energy metering, or sometimes just referred to as net metering, I think most people here are probably familiar with that concept, but generally, you know, we advocate for that as a sort of fair compensation for solar homeowners or solar businesses who are providing power back to the grid. But yeah, in some, it's, you know, it varies state to state. And so California, I think, is sort of on the cusp of another sort of version of net metering, which I think Jose is alluding to, but I'm actually not sure, but I can make sure and connect him with folks in California who we're connected to who know more about that. So thanks for that question, Jose. Sorry, I don't know more.
No, I will definitely, I'll take down your name, and we'll be able to connect you with more information. So Lawton wanted to know, and probably your background and insight would help both you, Liz, and Lisa. So Lawton he says he has an issue and he wants to get an existing policy changed and wants to know where to start. Best way.
Yeah, that is a good question, kind of broad. Yeah, Lisa, if you have something, I'll think about it for a second.
Sure, Lawton, would you mind sharing in the chat just a little bit more details? Then I'd be happy to give a short answer now, and then possibly follow up after the call, depending on how
Oh yeah. So he
complex
said
it is.
net metering issue. In North Carolina, Duke Power takes our extra credits with no compensation, and North Carolina is the only state where Duke is allowed to do this.
Okay, that's interesting. Do you know, Lawton, if Duke Power has that power because of legislation passed by the legislator or by an appointed utility? Because that'd be helpful to know. Okay, so that's always really challenging because most utility commissions are appointed, meaning that it's more difficult to hold them accountable. However, there are different steps that can be taken. I think the first step would be learning more about the utility, the commissioners that you are working to influence, and seeing kind of what their backgrounds are and how and what their motivations are. And then from there, we can have a further conversation about building out different tactics and strategies to try to hold them accountable to changing that policy. That's a really short answer, seeing that we have limited time, but I would start with really doing research on each commissioner and a little bit more of their background and their motivation, because that'll be helpful to figure out what tactics make most sense to influence them. Hope that's helpful.
Oh, I just had to unmute myself and yeah, thanks, Lisa. That's great. And yeah, I think I can encourage folks to again use in the to button, send to all panelists and attendees would be great unless you just have a specific like technical issue to make sure that folks are staying part of the conversation. But yeah, and I think just to add on to, I think Lisa had a lot of good thoughts on that I think, you know, unfortunately, I would really like North Carolina to be a Solar United Neighbors state. It's not, but hopefully someday soon we'll expand to North Carolina. But we do have, there are partner organizations we work with who work more deeply in North Carolina. And so we can make sure that you are connected with some of those organizations if you're not already. And I think they can provide more specifics on the landscape and maybe the best way to address that issue in North Carolina. But I think Lawton also sent something about maybe small claims court, or thinking about, I mean, that's interesting, and I've never thought about that strategy. So it's interesting to brainstorm and be creative and think about like, well, what if I did something, you know, maybe at some level that's not going to change it, but could help be a part of a larger campaign and bring more attention to your issue and get more people involved to build towards a change at the Utility Commission or the legislature if that is needed.
So another question that we had was just a crash course on hashtags. So a quick information about what they are and what they do and why we'd want to use them, which I feel like we can answer pretty quickly.
Okay, yeah, I can take a stab at it, and then if Lisa, any of you guys want to add in, I will welcome that. I think, you know, generally hashtags are a way for people to all sort of use a similar, you know, few words to connect. So it helps connect all of the social media posts by a whole bunch of different people as part of the same thing, and ideally sort of helps get across what you want in a super short amount of time. So it helps sort of message what you want really briefly and connect a bunch of different conversations and show that like, wow, there's thousands and thousands of people who all want to save solar. That's really important and can sort of increase the impact. And I think, you know, it varies. There's a whole range of like how people create or use hashtags. And so, you know, maybe like our PPAs for West Virginia, it's just for like a specific piece of legislation we want to see passed, and it's sort of semi-narrow. I mean, I think at the same time, you know, Save Solar is one that I'm not sure that we've used before. maybe I'm relatively new at Sun, but definitely one that we could repurpose and continue to use and continue to show that there is immense support for solar. And then I think there are others from other movements, for example, like Black Lives Matter, that has really connected, you know, was not about a specific piece of legislation, but was more about connecting actions and stories across the country to tell this broader narrative and help people understand that there's this broader situation happening, right? So I think that you know, has been really powerful, but you know, in that case, that hashtag has been connected to protests, to actions in probably every state in the country, and really has sort of created and helped change the conversation around violence by police against Black folks, and sort of, and even more, but that's sort of how it started. So I think that hashtags can really help build a larger story. But yeah, Annie, Lisa, you guys want to add on?
Sure, I can add on. I think the nice thing about a hashtag too is that, I don't know if you've attempted this before, but if you go into like, let's say it's Instagram and you put the hashtag in as a search, then from there you see all the hashtags from all the posts from anyone that's used that hashtag. And so it can kind of build momentum and snowball off itself, but also gives individuals and elected officials an ability to see what kind of momentum there may be around a specific issue and how popular that issue is with their constituency. So just kind of reiterate what was said.
Awesome, thank you both. So this is less of a, well, it is a question. So what should we be doing, or sorry, let me word this better. So between now and November, shouldn't we all be spending all available time getting pro-solar candidates elected, which definitely, but there are definitely some of these issues that are coming up, like the FERC campaign, like these utility shutoffs that are not going to wait for an election, and they have an immediate impact on the people who they affect. So that's why we're pushing out these action alerts and these actions that you can take for these issues, because while we really do support pro-solar candidates and want to make sure that and certainly support you spending your time trying to get them elected, there are these issues that are really important that are affecting people now that we also want to make sure we're advocating for. I don't know if Liz, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that is extremely important. I think right now, Solar United Neighbors only exists as a 501c3 nonprofit, so we can't technically support specific candidates for office. So I feel like I should say that, but I think we're more than happy for our supporters to do that, and I hope that one day hopefully soon, we'll have a C4 arm so that we could do more specifically political work like that, like make endorsements and stuff. But it's a good point.
And then I can, there've been a few questions. Oh, John Catet has his hand raised. So John, if you do have a question, just type it in the chat and we'll be able to answer that. And if that was an accident to raise your hand, that's totally fine. Happens all the time. But just a couple of questions that came through the Q&A that I've been answering that people may not have seen. So Lewis asked if NERA, or the New England Regulatory Association, is dead, and do we know who these ratones are? So
Yeah, thanks, Annie, for that. It's a good question. So if folks weren't closely watching the Save Solar campaign at FERC and the petition filed by NERA, or the New England Ratepayers Association, to try to get FERC, as I mentioned earlier, to make a ruling on net metering at the national level that would undo all of the state policies. And that was dismissed last week. But I think NERA, I don't think that they're dead. Sadly, I think that they still exist. And I think there's still a lot of uncertainty about who they are. I think that they may have filed comments from 1 or 2 people they were claiming were just ratepayers, but were also like connected to utilities, and they didn't disclose that in their comments. So I think we maybe learned a little bit more about a couple of people connected to NERA. But that's a great question to potentially think about and or work with our partners. Like Energy and Policy Institute does a lot of good research and policy analysis and sort of digging into utility accountability and who are some of these groups like NERA. So maybe a good partnership would be sort of continued research around who they are in case we see them again.
A question that just came through was, what are suggestions for quote unquote remote outreach, specifically in Sydney, this person's area? Their township commissioner, state house and Senate reps, US House, and half of the US senators are already with the movement, the solar movement, so supporting them is obvious, but how do we reach out to legislators in other parts of the state?
Okay, I see, and that's in Pennsylvania, a hotbed of fossil fuel industry. That is a really good question. I think that, Lisa, do you want to respond? You actually have done some work around fighting the fossil fuel industry.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I have a background in political organizing and spent a number of years in Colorado fighting fracking. So my suggestion would be, so of course we all know this, but you only need a little over 50% of the vote. So keeping that in mind, I think something that often is misrepresented in this kind of work is we often forget that, but also, so you have the people who are with you, and then you have the people that obviously are very much against you. There's usually a small sect of the legislator that is somewhere in the middle or a swing vote. So my suggestion, I know I kind of suggested this with the Utility Commission too, the first step would start doing some research on those. Well, first figuring out how many votes you need if you're trying to push legislation one way or another. And then from there, figuring out who your swing votes are, who are the folks that you might be able to influence in your direction. From there, doing research on them, their past voting records, what kind of things influence them. So sometimes you can find other campaigns, maybe on social issues or otherwise, where that person was really influenced by media outreach, lobby meetings, phone calls, emails. So kind of doing that research. Then from there, you can start figuring out how you can build out tactics like I just mentioned to start to influence that legislator. And then finally, it could be worth it if you don't have, like, let's say you don't, this area of the state is 2 hours away, and you're not a constituent of that legislator, starting to look up organizations in the area and individuals in the area that you can connect with and build partnerships with, so that they can also be, showing up at committee meetings or lobbying on the behalf of whatever campaign you're working on. So that's kind of a short answer, but I would start with figuring out who your swing votes are through research. And then from there, I'd be happy to have continued conversations about how you can build out strategy and tactics to have them vote the way you want them to. So
yeah, and I guess I can say I put a link to work we're doing in Pennsylvania now to move forward a community solar legislation that's sort of in progress. I think unfortunately COVID really slowed it down, but it's still alive and it could pass this year. And so related to that, I think Pennsylvania is also a Solar United Neighbors state. So we have members across the state and in some of the rural areas, and we are doing work to engage those folks, I think. But I think if you know people in those areas, it's a lot more powerful if you know people to ask them to take action, maybe to take this action, or to set up a meeting with their representative. And maybe, if you have experience and you could help them set up the meeting and help them prepare and help them feel more confident about the meeting, that's a way that maybe you could help sort of make an impact in other parts of the state. And we, would be happy to work with you, particularly if you want to work on the community solar bill or other sort of pro-solar related policy in Pennsylvania.
It actually leads perfectly into one of the questions in the Q&A is Albert asked if we push for community solar systems, which there we do. We do in places that it makes sense for sure, because we do believe that the sun and solar is for everyone. So that doesn't always mean a rooftop solar system or a ground system that you own. So we do advocate for solar system, community solar, and fair community solar, which can sometimes be two different things.
Yeah, thanks, Annie. I think, yeah, we are overall very supportive of community solar, and I think we're very skeptical, critical of some of the programs that call themselves community solar, but just require you to pay extra for solar. And we really think people should be getting economic benefits from the community solar farms. So that's something that we continually advocate for. And it really varies state to state in terms of whether there is legislation enabling community solar and who that applies, which types of utilities that applies to or doesn't, or if we're in the process of trying to pass community solar legislation. And, you know, we try to make sure that that includes carve-outs and access for low to moderate income folks. And so that we're just sort of continually advocating for people and increased access to solar. But yeah, really varies sort of state to state based on the landscape.
Definitely. And Ed asks, are there other issues besides utility termination which are worthy of specific attention before November? And that's where our action alerts are super helpful, because especially on a nationwide and even a statewide basis, we don't necessarily know what's going to come up for sure. So it can be, there may be big things, there may be small things that come.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that we have some campaigns in the works, but are not public yet. But I think we want to, you know, basically, like I said before, continue to push for increased access to solar. And I think we're going to be looking at continued economic stimulus and how that can increase access to solar for all and how that can be an important part of our recovery. So, you know, we mentioned that action before around solar and the stimulus that we're pushing now, and I think there'll continue to be ongoing opportunities to push for specific policies that will make sure that solar is a part of recovery and increases access to solar, and make sure that, you know, solar jobs are a big part of that. So hopefully more exciting news coming from us this fall around opportunities and specific campaigns to support there.
Awesome. And Kevin asked, so he was talking more about going solar, but the fact that Tesla's advertising $1.49 per watt after the tax credits, which equates to around $2.10 per watt. So some prices are around $2.70 per watt, and how can a co-op compete with that? So I did reach out to our Go Solar team, so just to provide an answer to everybody. And the big difference is that we're an installer neutral nonprofit, and we help members go solar, and we also represent solar owner members through our advocacy efforts, like what Liz spends all of her time doing with us. And Tesla makes great batteries and cars, but doesn't manufacture or install solar panels. And they also use third-party contractors. So they have great advertising, but don't necessarily install in many areas and on many common roof types. So many members of our co-ops have originally put down deposits for Tesla products and then waited for years only to get a refund and join the co-op. So if anybody wants to talk about that specifically, this is a hot button issue for our Go Solar team, and something that they're talking with people about constantly. So you can feel free to email info@solarunitedneighbors.org for more information, and that'll get you in touch with the right people. So. Great. So I think, oh, perfect. I was just going to do that, Liz. So yeah, the other thing that I wanted to bring up was Jay was asking, he said anecdotally that daily he passes dozens of homes with solar panels on them, and is there any way through a local utility or through solar installers or through Sun that we can identify all solar homeowners in my local community or in my state? And that's an awesome question, and something that we're working on, but don't have a great way to do that because no one organization seems to be working on that right now. We do want to have a solar census and really gather the information from all of our solar homeowners, not just our solar homeowners, but solar homeowners across the nation. So we do have that database, and it's something that is one of the many volunteer projects that we're working on. So if it's an interest of anybody's, we definitely need support on it. It's one in a long list of projects that we want to get done. So that's something that we'll we are putting together a project plan for, and would definitely welcome some outside help.
Cool, thanks, Annie. And I guess just to be more specific in terms of solar census, you mean you're interested in working with folks like that who see solar panels in their neighborhood or in their community and like are willing to try to knock on their door or reach out to them or put a flyer on their door and try to like connect with them and get their information so that we are able to better connect those folks.
Yeah, that are door hangers or what have you. So, you know, a combination of developing out the program, so what we're actually going to use this information for, and just, you know, we don't want to have a whole bunch of people do something that then is information that sits and doesn't get utilized. So developing the scope of the program, and then there's the action phase of having people get out and knock on doors and leave door hangers, socially distanced right now, and figure out how to grab that info. So, yeah. And then Lewis asks, and we've got 2 minutes left, so I think this will be our last question, but there are plenty of, we can definitely get in touch with advocacy@solarunitedneighbors.org for more info, and we can stick around. But Lewis asks, high value, high quality solar electrons sent on the grid and up somewhere in the grid. Utility electrons sent to customers are poor quality and not returned to the solar customer. So why do utilities claim solar customers use their poles and wires and are paid by electric bills? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think we are continually up against the utilities who have a lot more money and resources than we do, and who see, you know, distributed solar generally as a threat to their profits, at least for the investor-owned utilities who are focused on that. And so they're out to, you know, and they've probably spent a lot of money focus grouping, like how can we best frame this and best message this and best get people to think that solar is bad and that we're subsidizing it. But, you know, I think the reality is that they're not really thinking about the value of solar. And I think we have some good resources on our website on the value of solar. And I think we've often, you know, when you think about the environmental impacts, local economic impacts, and there's a lot of grid support that solar can help reduce the need for infrastructure, grid infrastructure upgrades. And, you know, I think there's also a conversation around the solar produced at your home that is going to your neighbors when you're not using it is not the same as power produced really far away at a power plant that has to go through miles and miles of transmission and distribution lines and, you know, all kinds of other infrastructure to get to your house, and there's line loss involved in that, and all kinds of things. So it's not, so I wouldn't say that it's the same thing. But I think that you're right, and the utilities have been better about articulating that, and we need to keep talking about fair compensation and the value of solar and keep pushing on that. So maybe that would make for a good follow-up webinar training around that. So thanks for that question.
And then, Liz, you might just know if we have this resource, because I'm trying to search on our website and I'm not positive. But Eric asks if there's a go-to stat sheet that we can refer officials to or refer to ourselves in composing advocacy or sharing with friends about job creation, amount of rooftop solar in use, pollution control, et cetera, about solar or on some site, which I don't. We have all that information. That is a
great question. Yeah. I think that the Solar Energy Industry Association, SEIA, has some good resources around jobs. But that might be a good Google search. Maybe Annie can find it before I can. Or I think we're definitely going to look back through these questions and see if we missed any and make sure to follow up with you all with answers and links. And it seems like some of you are connecting who are in North Carolina. That's really great. And I think people, I guess just to touch back to the organizations in North Carolina, someone mentioned the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. I used to work there a long time ago. I think they're a great resource. Appalachian Voices. I think there's a North Carolina Energy Justice Coalition that may also be a good resource. And there's a North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association that specifically is bringing together folks just around solar and other renewable energy. So they may also be a good resource. But that's great that you all are connecting with each other in the chat. I'm excited about that. Maybe someday we'll be in North Carolina.
Maybe. Yeah, and that's a good reminder, Liz. So yeah, if we can, Eric, if we can find a fact sheet like that, we'll include it with the follow-up email, so everybody will have access to that. So,
cool.
Great.
Thanks, Annie. I guess we're a couple minutes behind, but thank you all. As you